Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scriptorium's annual Trends broadcast, our 2015 edition. My name's Sarah O'Keefe, and I'll be your host and moderator today, and I've got a bunch of other people on the line, so we will get right to it. We have a lot to talk about, and I'm afraid we have some disagreements to talk about, so we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Let me do a quick roll call and make sure that I have everybody that's supposed to have audio. Alan, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. Bill?
I'm right here.
And Gretyl?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. And I can see that we've got a bunch of people coming online, so welcome aboard, and we'll look forward to your questions and comments throughout this event today. So we are going to be talking today about our content trends, and just a couple of things to get out of the way before we get started here. We have 3 people doing analysis today for us. Well, 4 if you count me. Maybe we don't. Our hashtag is Content2015, so we would encourage you to participate on Twitter. Scriptorium is, in fact, at @Scriptorium, so that's apparent enough. The people that are on the call today are all Scriptorium consultants here with different kinds of focuses. Alan is our Director of Operations. He does most of our implementation management and also some of the upfront content strategy and analysis. He and I are the co-authors of Content Strategy 101. And Alan, you are there and ready to go, right?
I think so.
I think you have the first trend, so consider this your 1-minute warning. Gretyl Kinsey is a technical consultant. She is also across the hall from me here. Is interested in building data plugins, content strategy tools, business case analysis, and also has a background on the creative marketing side of things, which I think will come into play today. We then have Bill Swallow. Bill?
Hello.
There you are. Bill is currently in Albany, New York, so while the rest of us are in North Carolina complaining about how cold it is, Bill is in Albany where it is truly cold. Bill's interests, in addition to, sort of the usual, are particularly in localization, process improvement, and management issues around content strategy. And again, my name's Sarah O'Keefe. I'm the founder and president here. I do a bunch of content strategy work, and I've decided my other title should be recalcitrance adjuster when I was informed that I needed another bullet item, so there you go. All right. Given the 4 of us, we expect trouble, so we hope this will work. We have 6 different trends, so each of my panelists has 2 trends that he or she is going to talk about. We're going to have some polite discussion after every trend, and we would encourage all of you that are on this call, that are on the webcast, to add your questions and comments in the questions model of GoToWebinar. Or also, if you want, via Twitter. I will have an easier time seeing the questions in GoToWebinar. So if you really want us to respond to something, I would encourage you to put it there. If you just want to comment, across the universe about what's going on, then you can go ahead and do that on Twitter, and that would be great. Those of you that are not trend presenting are probably muted, and we are recording this, and we will make the recording available after the fact, but your name will not be shown as an attendee. All right, so with that, I think we're ready to get started, and our first trend comes today from Alan, who wants to talk to us about content strategy and IT. So Alan.
Yes. Over the past few years, I've really seen an evolution in how IT departments come into play on content strategy projects. Years ago, it seemed to me a lot of the time IT was brought in a little later in the game, and there was also some adversarial positioning going on. I can remember one client one time saying, yeah, our IT department, they're impossible to work with. We don't like them. And as it turned out, the IT department turned out to be a really huge asset for them and really went to the mat to help them get the system set up like they should have been. More recently, I have seen cases where IT departments are the primary stakeholder and are the folks that are really instigating changes in content strategy because they see the overall bigger picture. of how content is flowing across a company, and then can say, you know what, we don't think this is working, let's reevaluate this. So it's come from kind of, we don't like you, come to the table very late, if you will, to you're at the head of the table, let me help you figure this out. That's the transition that I have seen over the past 5 to 7 years.
And Gretyl, do you have any thoughts on this? Are there downsides to this?
The biggest thing that comes to mind for me is what happens when your IT department is maybe driving a project, but then they're wanting to make a decision that works really well for them. So, for example, they want to pick a type of system or maybe a particular tool that's going to work really well for their department, but that makes things harder for content creators or maybe doesn't serve the organization very well as a whole.
So, Alan, what do we do with that? I mean, are we going to see conflicts because of this, or is it a good thing?
No, it's inevitable. They're always going, I don't know if conflict's the right word, there can be disagreements. And just because, you know, IT may be driving a project does not mean that you as a content creator or content manager have to bow and scrape to their decisions. I am not trying to position them as the, you know, know-all, be-all. There are cases where, you know, IT's job is to consolidate and use as few tools as possible because it keeps overhead down, maintenance down, licensing down. However, if you, for example, need to do modular content and you need to manage small chunks and components of content and images and whatever, and you've got an IT department saying, yeah, just throw it in SharePoint, there's a huge problem there. There is a conflict there because you're not meeting your business goals because SharePoint natively, for example, cannot handle modular content very well. So yes, you do need to, you know, pay attention to what the business requirements are and be sure that IT is doing that along with you.
Okay. Either of the other two of you want to jump in on this? Do you have anything else to say about this one? I think it's definitely an interesting trend. And
I can jump in here quickly.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Okay, sorry about that. The other item to think about really is that when you're implementing a content strategy, usually your software purchase is going to have a very large footprint on that, or at least the dollar sign is going to have a very large footprint on that strategy for approval. And given that IT usually will be the ones maintaining it and pushing it out there, they're going to be very mindful of the impact it's going to have overall in the organization. So I can see where IT would drive the content strategy development from a technology perspective, but it definitely is very important to make sure that you know, other groups are involved, and if you're planning on driving a content strategy, that you work as copacetically with IT as possible.
Yeah, one big advantage I see to this, and I think this ties into what you're saying, is that IT is accustomed to doing large projects. They don't fall over and die when all of a sudden we're looking at $1 million budget. So they have that experience. Okay, let's take a look here and see what we have next. I wanted to ask those of you that are on the call to fill out a poll. And what we're looking for here is the question of how well do you get along with your IT department? What's the relationship between your IT group and your content organization? Are things awesome? Do you get along? You know, is it kind of not great? Or is it one of these, we despise them and we refer to them as the information prevention department and this type of thing? Because I have seen that in some cases. Let me give you a few seconds here and we'll take a look at what kind of results we get. I really, really wish we had done this poll 10 years ago because I suspect that the results would be different now and that we would be able to, in fact, see some sort of a trend from that. Okay, I'm going to close this out and let's take a look and see what we get. All right, so Alan, any surprises for you here?
I'm surprised we didn't see more in the chili tolerance. I thought there might be a little more. Sworn enemies, there's 0% there. That's kind of pleasing, but it's good. It looks like people are playing well together, and that's a good thing.
Great. All right. Moving along to trend number 2, which I believe belongs to Gretyl.
Yes.
And you win the award for best slide. All right. Tell us about the customer journey.
All right. So when someone is buying a product, they're not just buying a product, they're buying an experience. And so what I'm seeing more and more of is that it's becoming a lot more important for content to be a major part of that experience or of that customer journey. And so this journey usually includes something like starting with researching or deciding what you're going to buy, then actually buying the product, using it, possibly reviewing or recommending that product to other people, and then remembering what that experience was like and using that when you are shopping in the future. And so there are a lot of areas of this that content can come into play. So for example, a lot of times marketing content will be what kind of draws you in or educates you about the product and gets you interested. And there's also some room for technical content to come into play here as well if you are looking for something that maybe has a lot of technical information that you need to know about before you can make a choice. And then once you actually have the product and you're trying to use it, obviously that's where a lot of your technical content will be very important. And then if the customer does kind of review or give recommendations about the product, that's where they're going to be interacting with your content and maybe contributing some of their own content, for example, online, that other customers may see that becomes part of their journey. And so when you're coming up with a content strategy, it's going to be really important to keep this customer journey in mind so that your content is a strong part of it and not just an afterthought. And I think one of the things that I see kind of driving this trend is this increasing use of technology in our daily lives. That gives content creators a lot of opportunity to make content part of the customer journey, and it also helps people gather information from their customers about their experience using the product, and then that can therefore give you the opportunity to tailor your customer journey to different types of customers, for example, by delivering content in different ways or on different platforms.
So a blurring, perhaps, of the line between marketing and technical, and I think we've seen a lot of that this year.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and while I see that this is a trend, it seems to be a trend more on the customer side as an expectation, and I think a lot of companies are really starting to pick up on this more after the fact. So what we're seeing is people responding to improper information being posted online. We see a lot of complaining on social media whenever someone finds something incorrect or confusing or whatnot. Their gut instinct now is to go to Twitter, go to Facebook, post about it, and pretty soon the brand is playing, the company is playing catch up and trying to save face. But on the other hand, also looking at being proactive about engaging the customer, in their overall experience. We have to also keep in mind that there's a major localization factor involved here, and it's not just knowing your one audience, but it's knowing your global audience and knowing what they all expect. And sometimes you may have conflicting needs and conflicting expectations that you need to address.
Mm-hmm. So what does this mean? From a Gretyl, from a content strategy project perspective, what does this mean for us, or what does this mean for those of us on the call that are trying to make this happen?
I think it just means that you're going to have to really think ahead a lot more and to actually go out and use the information that you can gather from your customers a whole lot more when you're coming up with creating your content. And I think the other way that you can use it is if you see a need for your content process to change or improve, you can go ahead and, while you're making a change, say, let's work this idea of the customer journey in and let's make our content more customer-friendly, more customer-focused, so that we can really deliver not just a product but the whole experience that they're looking for, and then get them to come back and buy something from us again.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I actually heard a lot about this when I was at Gilbane in December. It definitely seemed to be a big priority there. I haven't seen it at a lot of the other conferences, interestingly enough. So, all right, trend number 3, I believe, belongs to Bill. And Bill, what you got?
I think we're going to see a continued or an increase in the executive ion content. So we've, for a while now, we're talking maybe 10 years or so, the idea of having an executive sponsor for a major product like a project strategy implementation was fairly commonplace. But more and more we're seeing executives who have a firm investment in the project, if not direct ownership over it. So much so that we're actually seeing more and more titles out in the field for a chief content officer. It's gaining a lot of traction. It was traditionally reserved for a lot of broadcasting and media companies, but now we're seeing it in lots of different consumer companies, software, hardware, manufacturing, anyone who has a large scope of content to manage. And this person is ultimately charged with the successful adoption and execution of a content strategy. And the reason for this is that content is increasingly being seen as a business asset. And they're trying to make, we're all trying to make content as valuable as possible to the consumer. Customers want good information before they buy. They want to do a lot of independent research, so they're not necessarily looking for the hand-holding, behind-the-curtain approach that was very popular with at least large enterprise sales in the late 90s and early 2000s. And given that social media also allows you to put your worst foot forward, so to speak, whereas people are going to grab and televise exactly how many mistakes you make in putting your content out there, the executives are really taking a look at this and saying we have to put our best foot forward. We have to be able to tie everything back into our brand and our message and our shareholders and our stakeholders and whatnot. To make sure that the content aligns with the company goals, and so that it puts the best face as possible on the company. And also having an executive eye on content really does ensure that the project itself is funded properly, and that any issues that pop up during a content strategy implementation are resolved as quickly as possible.
So, Alan, what's your take on this? Do you agree with this one?
Somewhat. And there's this stereotype out there. Executives know nothing about the real world. That's unfortunate, but they're a manager. They don't know anything. There are some people that is true. Unfortunately, they're a little out of touch with what's going on. But I have also seen the flip side of that very vividly, where executive basically said, I don't need all these metrics. I don't need all these numbers. I can tell you exactly what is wrong with this part of the big picture. I know content is part of it. Fix it. So sometimes they have an uncanny ability to zero in on exactly what the problem is and really give you a very basic, the core. This is what we need to fix. So that can happen. So, all management is not useless, contrary to popular belief. And I say that as a manager, so yeah.
And I think there's a very interesting point in here, which I think, Bill, you kind of touched on. 10 years ago, we were getting an awful lot of cut costs, focus on efficiency. Now we're getting make the content better at the executive level. That's a very different demand, right? It's not make it as cheap as possible. It's this has to be good, and I think it goes back to the trend that Gretyl started with of customer journey. Because if the content is bad, you can't have a customer-focused, customer experience, customer journey thing.
Right. And I also think that a lot of executives, they can see beyond what are sometimes very artificial constructs. This is marketing content. This is technical communication. This is support. They kind of look beyond that and say, I want this information to be correct, consistent across the board. The labeling of it in our group, in our company, that is sort of irrelevant to me. And I think that's a very important thing people, at all levels need to do, is to start looking at content as a whole and not as a, pigeonholed in, oh, this must just be marketing. It doesn't work like that anymore. And a good executive recognizes that.
So the question I wanted to ask here of those of you that are on the call is basically, what is the highest level of management that gets involved with your content or with your content issues? Now, I'm not talking about who is your direct manager. It's more like when you try to do some sort of a content initiative, who is it that's interested, right? Who is it, what's the highest level where somebody says, I'm going to fund that, or I want you to present to me, or I want you to talk to me about this kind of thing? So your choices here are CEO, president, whatever the chief executive is, some sort of C-level. It might be your chief investment officer, chief information officer, chief technical officer, chief marketing officer, maybe you have a chief content officer, etc. Below that, a VP director kind of level, a line manager, which would presumably be the first level of management that actually has direct reports. And then we threw in one last option in case you're out in the boonies somewhere and nobody ever talks to you except for, your dog in your office with you. And it looks like so far that's not a big vote, so that's good. Okay, so let's take a look here, and I'll show the results, and Bill, I'll ask you to take a look at this and tell me what you think.
It's actually kind of surprising. I would have expected probably a little bit more on the C level, but also a bit more still on the manager level. So it's very good to see that a lot of companies are taking this seriously at the VP or director level or above. And no dogs driving it.
And no dogs driving the strategy, or not that anybody's admitting to. Gretyl, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's also kind of what you were saying about tying back to the customer journey idea. I think that these executives are going to be probably, in some cases, the best people who have an idea of what that customer journey should be. And so if you've got people at the VP level or above kind of driving your content strategy or caring about content issues, then that is going to be a really good thing.
All right, so this is somewhat reassuring. All right, let's take a look here at what we have next. And trend number 4, I believe, goes to Alan.
Yes. Past few years, I have really seen an increase in content creators wanting to be sure that subject matter experts, tool experts, internal experts are able to contribute content easily to the process and to review content. Even to this day, there are people, for example, they solicit content by either sending out a printed book and people mark it up and get their feedback that way, or they share a PDF and then manually type in the comments, get those, consolidate them, put them back into the source content. More and more content creation systems are allowing people to actually get into the source and not necessarily edit the source, but to suggest edits, additions, changes, whatever, and then someone on the content creation side can approve it. Approve those changes or say, no, that's not quite right, we don't want to do that. Basically, we're seeing a lot more collaboration, and you are seeing the tools chains enable this more and more, so you are not basically limited to handing out a marked up piece of paper and passing it around the office, or God forbid mailing it across to different offices across the country, which I've also heard happen, which is horrifying. So more and more the digital world and the tool chains are allowing people to offer their suggestions, create content in an environment that's very comfortable for them. For example, it very much mimics like working in a Microsoft Word document, which most people are fairly comfortable with. So I think it's making a very big difference in the efficiency of getting content written and then reviewed and ready for public consumption.
So what are some of the implications of this, Gretyl?
I think for what I'm seeing with this, it kind of goes along with this idea of, as you're getting more and more technologically inclined, I guess you could say, that's really helping our content strategy both inside and outside the organization. So while we've talked a lot before about how this is helping the customers, this is kind of the flip side of that, where it's helping, if you've got content contributors that really, they don't know anything about your actual creation process, they just know about whatever subject they're an expert in. This is using technology to your best advantage to allow them to really make the most of their abilities as a contributor. And so I think, like you were saying, Alan, this is really going to help increase efficiency and make things a lot easier both inside the organization, so that that can help make things easier on the outside as well. I think one of the questions that I would have asked you too is, what have you seen as some of the biggest challenges to getting something like this implemented so that things can actually be made easier for these experts to contribute?
Well, a lot of time there are tool collisions. For example, programmers or developers will say, we've already got this tool over here and this is what we're going to use, and then the folks on the Marcom or TechCom side say, well, we're using this. There is a collision of tools, and that can be difficult, and that's where I think a lot of times having a third party kind of to come in and intervene and to look at both sides of the story and figure out where that middle ground should be. Having that outside consultant voice can be very helpful in mediating problems like that.
And then have you also seen, I know that this, in the end result is that it makes things easier for these experts to contribute, and probably just for everyone inside the organization overall to create content, but have you seen change resistance issues, and if so, how has that been resolved?
If you don't see change resistance, I would be amazed. I've yet to see a case where there wasn't a little bit of change resistance. Anytime you introduce new tools, it is going to happen. But a big part of this, and this is basically Change Management 101, it is not limited to content contributors, content strategy, content problems. You really need to start the communication channels early. You need to really be listening, not just hearing, but listening what folks are saying. And then also you really need to be sure that training is part of your budget. Everything I'm talking about is, I think, fairly, super elementary. But you'd be amazed how many projects, a lot of times, training, for example, explaining how to use the new system, the new review tools or whatever, pittance is left budget-wise for training and helping people get up to speed. So you've spent all this money on this new review tool, and you don't have any money to show people how to use it. That is a foresight problem, and you really need to, from the very beginning of your content strategy, be sure you're budgeting not just for the tools, but also for getting people up to speed, because otherwise you've just wasted a ton of money and time.
I think this one's fascinating because in the olden days, which is to say, let's say maybe in the 1960s and 70s, we had the expert who would write things on a longhand on a piece of paper, hand it off to the sort of typing tool, get it written up kind of thing. And then if you take the long view, we sort of had the rise of the professional writer or the professional technical or marketing writer. And now we seem to be going back to this idea of the experts need to contribute and be integrated into the process. And Alan, we have a question related to that from our audience, which is do you see or foresee, he says, any blowback from the experts who say, don't ask me to write, you're the writer?
Well, on the flip side of that, I have heard some content creators say, I'm not a programmer, I don't want to work in XML code. there is this mindset, very limiting mindset. I just want to do this job. Well, guess what? In this day and age, your job in content strategy, anywhere content touches or technology, you can't pigeonhole yourself like that anymore. You're going to pigeonhole yourself right out of a job. So yes, I have heard this and I've seen it on both sides, both on the content creation side and on the product development side. There has got to be a middle ground where both parties are doing a little bit of the heavy lifting technologically and doing the content creation. One good thing about a lot of these tools and review programs and whatnot, they make it fairly easy, and I hate to use the word easy anytime technology is involved because what's easy for one person is not for another, but they are making the interfaces very much like word processing and things that are fairly, people who are somewhat computer literate are going to be comfortable doing, and that goes a long way of making what really may be writing seem less like writing. I'm just going to make a few comments over here in this document very quickly. Even though they may just be marking something up or offering suggested edits, there's actually some content creation going on there, but the tool kind of disguises the fact by making it, like I said, easy, which I know is subjective, but make it easier to do, for example.
Yeah, and I would just add to that we've definitely seen some pushback along the lines of, I don't want to do this. But I think it's actually more common to see pushback that is along the lines of, you need to allow the experts to be involved. So in other words, it's more common for the experts to be asking for access and to be able to contribute easily than it is for them to be pushing it out of the way.
Yeah, and I think there is some of this issue, and this will come up later. I don't want to get I don't want to steal someone's thunder, but people feeling ownership of their little corner of the world. This is just my stuff. I don't want you touching it. There's a little bit of false ownership syndrome going on here too. This is mine. Don't touch it.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's take a look here and see what we have coming up. So trend number 5, which is perhaps the slide with the image most appropriate for today, given our weather, at least in the U.S., at least in places that are not, I suppose, San Diego or somewhere like that. Trend number 5, Gretyl, what have you got here?
So I want to talk about cross-company focus in content strategy implementation, and this is mostly a trend for me about breaking down silos. So Alan, what you actually were just saying about this content is mine and don't touch it is actually a really great segue into this, because we've actually seen a pattern of content silos within companies where, you know, one group will produce technical content over here, and then another group over here will do marketing content, and then another group might do training content, or another group might handle sales-related or support-related content, and then these groups don't really interact with each other and collaborate, and maybe if they do interact, it's to say, don't touch my stuff. And so what this leads to, having all these silos, what this leads to is content that doesn't really work well together, and that can hold your company back. And so, you know, one group's content might be really good and it might represent your company really well to your customers, and then another group's content might be confusing or frustrating to your customers, and that might hurt your company. So really it's very important to break these silos down. That's why I think I'm really happy to see this trend kind of developing. And so one of the ways that you can get rid of this idea of silos is to develop a content strategy that encompasses all of your content, and that'll be more effective than just developing a content strategy, for example, for one department while ignoring all the others. I actually have seen and heard more people talking about this year than ever before. At Information Development World, I had several different people talk to me about how silos are actually the thing that they want to tackle in developing a content strategy. So instead of saying we need to improve this process, they're saying we need to break down these silos. And at ID World, that was also a place where I saw people from different content producing groups interacting with each other more, instead of maybe having a conference that focuses just on one part of this content industry. It's kind of going more general content than being broken out into departments, which I think is going to be really helpful. And it kind of ties back into what I talked about earlier with this idea of the customer journey. If your content is focused across the whole organization and is designed to all work together, that's really going to enhance that customer journey better than having these silos separating it out.
So Bill, as I recall, you and I did a trends presentation last year that was entirely silo-themed. I thought you might have some thoughts on this one.
Yeah. As much as I would say that the cross-company focus is definitely on the rise, it comes back to people really love their silos. And even if they don't and they do want to work outside of the silo, a lot of times there is so much embedded in the way that they need to work, the channels that they have to go through because of financial reasons or because of reporting structures, that it's going to hinder this cross-company, focused growth. And I think that it's very important to, if you have an environment like that where the silos are not so much artificial, but they're fairly physical, at least with regard to financial and reporting, as far as finance and reporting goes, that needs to be the first thing to tackle before you really can start getting that cross-company focus working. Some things that play into that are software purchases and being able to share information across departments. If you're in two different budget structures, in two different IT groups supporting each silo, it's going to be very difficult to marry those two immediately. You may have a year before you're able to even share files appropriately and leverage the content well.
And it seems almost like we've got a trend of trends emerging, because if you look at several of the trends we're talking about have to do with cross-company, higher level executive focus, more requests of contributors that are outside the so-called professional writing group, or the full-time content creators. This one, and I don't remember off the top of my head what number 6 is, but I guess we'll find out. So Gretyl, what's your take on this as we look at this, and think a little? I think we have a poll on this one.
Yeah, we do. We're just asking, how siloed is your
so
organization?
let's ask that question. How siloed is your organization, and see what people have to say, and then we'll let you jump in on that. So participants, how siloed are you? Are you one big happy content producing family, or are you, silos have silos, or perhaps you're somewhere in the middle? And we'll see what comes up here. I anticipate that this one's going to be pretty ugly, because for the reasons that Bill is describing, right?
Yeah, I think that with this trend, there's definitely kind of an issue of not only what you were saying, Bill, about these structures being in place being really hard to knock down, but also change resistance, and also the fact that for this kind of a trend to really work, and I think some of these other trends that are related to it, this applies as well, you really have to be thinking more big picture and more long term. You may not see the immediate rewards of breaking down your silos for a long time. And so I think that's what holds people back from pursuing it actively, is that it's a risk, but I think that in the long run it will pay off if your content is really more focused on being all across the organization and not separated into silos.
All right, well, let's take a look and see what we got here. Oh dear.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of people are still stuck in the silo world.
So I don't know if that means that we are seeing the outliers and there's hope, or what. But what do you think about this, Gretyl?
I think it could mean we're seeing outliers. It could also mean that people want to break out of their silos but haven't really had the opportunity, or they're I think it's good that we're seeing 40% on we're trying to reduce silos. So that's good. It may just be an issue where people are starting to have that mindset, but it's going to take a long time for things to actually go in this direction.
Yeah.
I think this also speaks to why silos have been such a popular topic over the past few years, is that people are trying to break them down, but they're just that resilient.
Resilient silos.
As we're seeing.
Okay, so onward to our last trend, which I believe belongs to Bill. Bill, your puppies are in cages. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I wanted to actually take a break from all of this silo talk and whatnot and actually talk about something a little bit different. Although it does kind of bring back to some of the things we've been saying about why the content, there's such a big content focus lately, and that, it's that the social media landscape is going to change. It has been changing, but there are some outliers there that have been around for quite a while, and even though they still seem new to many of us, let's talk about Facebook, let's talk about Google+. These are platforms that have been around for quite some time, and according to my kids and my kids' friends and whatnot, these are all the mom and dad networks. These are the networks that all the old people are using, and they want nothing to do with it. And I was talking with my kids. I have one going into high school soon, and I have one in college, and I wanted to talk to them a little bit about their social media use and what they use, what their friends use, how they share information, how they network, and whatnot. A lot of them, and their friends, a lot of their friends and my children as well, they maintain a Facebook page and whatnot to kind of talk to family and whatnot, but a lot of their actual interaction with their friends are done in private networks, which is kind of scary. But at the same time, it really speaks to a different way of looking at social applications, social networking, and sharing of information. They don't want the world to know what they're doing. They don't care that the world knows what they're doing. They have no interest in it. It's not that they're trying to hide anything, but they just don't feel the need to put everything out there. So they're working in person with their friends on using these very small sharing applications. They are doing a lot with Kick Messenger and so forth, where a lot of it's anonymous within a certain radius. But they kind of know who's saying what about something, and they actually use social media to promote real-life interactions. So, and being able to meet up with their friends and whatnot. And what this really says to content strategy is that, well, yes, they're kids. We don't need to necessarily worry about what they're doing. But, these kids, they're going to be either in college or in the working force in 5 to 10 years. What is that going to say about how they choose to share information and engage with other people and engage with companies and brands online? My kids really don't care that Coca-Cola or whoever else has a Facebook page. They don't follow it. They don't care. They're on Facebook to just goof around and talk to their aunt who lives across country, so to speak. And we're also seeing that there's an increase in using Tumblr, Reddit, and other more public platforms rather than using Facebook, Google+. Google+ is falling pretty much off the map with young viewers, according to digital trends. They're actually putting Google+ users among the teens and young adults at roughly about 10% usage. And they're actually showing Instagram at a very high 74%. So what does this really say? I'm not entirely sure, but what the trend seems to be showing that the traditional sharing of information in social media is going to be changing. We're not going to see a lot of Facebook, Google+, blogging, and other resources being used by the younger generation. So our social media and social engagement strategies around content strategy are going to need to adapt.
Mm-hmm. So Alan, what do you think on this one?
I think this goes back to one of the oldest and best guidelines for any kind of writing, TechCom, Marcom, whatever, and that is know your audience. That's the most important thing here. And I think we've all seen in social media and in advertising, companies selling fairly traditional products trying to play like they're all hip out on Twitter and some of the other, and Reddit and whatever else, trying to act cool, and it's painful. It's absolutely painful to see. Sure, you know, you're trying to reach the broadest audience possible. I understand the desire to want to do that, but you need to go where your buyers are, and you need to direct it toward them. So it's just that basically old adage, know your audience, and tailor your social media strategy and your content strategy accordingly. And don't try to play like you're 19 when you're really 49, like I do. I'm kidding. But anyway, yeah.
And one interesting thing that I see with this too is that the social media platforms actually, I think, change with time and maybe kind of have a generation associated with them. So, for example, what I've seen with Facebook is, and now I'm going to reveal myself as the youngest person here, my freshman year of college, I think Facebook was in its first or second year of existing. And over the last 5-10 years, what I've noticed is that it's gone from a kind of more private social network into something that's more for self-promotion and for business and advertising. And I think that what you were saying, Bill, is like now that the kids are not using that anymore. I think what's happening is that social media platforms are probably going to change from generation to generation, and each group is going to find a thing that works for them. And so then, Alan, what you're saying about know your audience is really important, and it's also important to anticipate that what's working right now may not work in a year or two, and so you always have to constantly keep learning and growing and changing and really staying on top of what is going to come next and what the trends are, instead of just getting stuck in what works right now, because this is one of the fastest changing ways of communicating that we've seen.
So to bring that back to our content issues, then I suppose the implication of this is that you can't build a strategy on optimizing for Facebook at the expense of everything else. You have to be able to pivot and put things on whatever that next platform is that isn't there yet, or that isn't. And I suppose the other thing that comes to mind for me, and this is just more of a comment, I suppose, I mean, is this going to be like music, where there's a distinctive 80s music and a distinctive 90s music and a distinctive music of the the 2000 decade? And so there's going to be a social media platform for each group?
I think that's dead on accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll also see that with clothing, although now I'm starting to see ripped jeans and acid wash jeans in stores again. So I don't know.
No polyester bell bottoms, please. We don't need that back.
So what we're saying
that was
is
last decade.
Yeah.
So 2015 is going to be the year of CompuServe?
Pretty much, I think.
Or MySpace.
Or MySpace.
Yeah.
Okay.
MySpace.
So for those of you on the call, we do have time for some questions, and wanted to see what sorts of things you all might want to contribute and throw in there. One that I wanted to start with, and I think, Alan, I'll direct this to you. We've touched on this in talking through the trends. But one question that I think is important to the people that are on the call is, how is our, when you look at the kind of work that we're doing today versus the kind of work that we were doing, let's say, 5 years ago or even 2 years ago, how is the project focus changing? So stepping away from trying to identify trends, how is the work changing that we're doing, and how are the projects changing that are out there that need to happen?
I'm starting to see a shift, and I'm glad of it, away from this, especially on the TechCom side. And sorry, TechCom folks, I'm about to tell some truth here. There is this rabid obsession with tools in TechCom. There always has been. I am starting to see a little bit of breakdown on that, where people are starting to realize the tool should not be driving the process. The process should be driving the tools. And I'm starting to see a bit of pivot of that, and to that I say it's about time. I think that's a very positive thing that's starting to evolve a little bit right now.
So Gretyl, to you, having outed yourself as the youngest person, at least on the panel, there might be somebody on the call that's younger. What kind of advice would you give somebody that's just getting started? What's the number one thing if they want to be in content strategy, this kind of business? What are the most what would you tell them?
That your number one job is to learn and never stop learning. And if you do stop learning, it's basically a death sentence on your career because everything changes so much. Just in the 3 years that I've been with Scriptorium, I have seen a lot of change in this industry and in the content industry and also in kind of these sub-industries like TechCom and Marcom. I've seen lots of changes, Bill, like you were saying, in social media and in the way that customers consume products and media. And so I think the biggest thing to do is just to keep learning, and especially now in this technology information age, it's going to be much more important than ever before that you just never stop learning.
That might be good advice for anybody in any industry.
At any age.
At any age.
Yeah.
So, Bill, I have a question here about the silo issue. And basically it's how do you go about doing this? How do you go about starting to break down the silos and getting that, it needs to happen, it's important. What do you do?
That's a good question, and unfortunately it does depend on your organization. It really does come back to the level of executive ownership and executive interest in being able to drive a content strategy. All of the issues that create silos need to be broken down from the top, and it's really hard to peck at it from the bottom level. So my advice is to get that executive buy-in, as high up as you can, and start getting executives talking to each other and being able to get consensus that it is a good thing to pursue, and explain how sharing of information will ultimately help the organization as a whole, and definitely point it toward your organization's goals, and find an executive that can champion that for you.
Okay. So I want to wrap this up with one last question to each of the three of you, which has to do less with trends and, well, it's more like, if you could have your own trend, if you could wave a wand and make things happen, what would you like to see happen? What would you like to see happen in the world of content in the next year that would really, improve the world of content, make your day, make you happy, whatever. And while the three of you are thinking about that, I'll throw out mine, which has to do with, it ties into some of the stuff we've talked about, but I'm really hoping, this is where we hope, I'm really hoping that the increased discussion around customer experience, user experience, customer journey, and all the rest of it will lead to an increased focus on good content. Whether that means development, delivery, whatever it is, that content will be better because people do recognize the value. And I'm hoping that, we're hearing a lot about CX, customer experience, and I'm hoping that that will lead down the road of improving our content operations generally. Who wants to go next?
I think I'll go next.
Go ahead, Gretyl.
Okay, because along those lines, I think kind of for me, from a customer perspective, I would like to see feedback from customers really taken more into account when it comes to creating content, because I feel like a lot of times if I have issues using content and then give feedback on it, it sort of feels like shouting out into the void, and like some of those problems don't ever really get fixed. And so, and in the companies who do take customer feedback into account and do it well, I find that to be a really exceptional and much appreciated experience to have. So I would like to see customer feedback taken more seriously.
Okay. Alan, Bill?
I would like to see people looking at content not from a departmental ownership point of view, but from a company enterprise-wide point of view. Thanks to everyone for attending, and don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us at info@scriptorium.com. You can also read our blog at scriptorium.com/blog. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you in the new year.